Liberty process.
This is an instructional assembly video for the Liberty Series LL4 progressing cavity pump. While repairing, disassembling, or installing any Liberty Process product, we recommend using the operations, maintenance, and installations manuals and reviewing them before starting any repairs. These are available for view or downloadable at www.libertyprocess.com. These manuals contain the full information on how to properly and safely assemble, disassemble, and safely operate your Liberty Progressive Cavity Pump. Tools required for the assembly of the Liberty Series LL4 Progressing Cavity Pump: a soft hammer or rubber mallet, a hammer, a strap wrench, pipe wrench, or chain wrench, a dowel rod less than 1 inch in diameter, a 3/4 inch, 5/8 inch, and 9/16 inch wrench, an appropriately sized or adjustable hook spanner wrench for tightening the pump drive shaft lock nut, a 5/16 Allen wrench, a pin punch 3/16 of an inch in diameter or smaller, a tape measure, a level, pipe thread sealer, a vise mounted to a table or stand, and an arbor press or hydraulic press. Radial and thrust grease seal installation. Put the pump bearing housing on a workbench with the side that the bearing cover will be installed on the bottom. This will expose where the radial grease seal will be installed into the top of the bearing housing. Put the radial grease seal onto the pump bearing housing in the appropriate location and gently tap into place with the dowel rod and hammer. The thrust grease seal can be installed into the bearing cover by placing the cover on the workbench with the seal area face up. Set the seal in place on the cover and tap gently into place until the seal is flush in the cover. Pump suction casing installation on the bearing housing and suction body support installation. Mount or clamp the bottom piece of the suction body support onto the workbench using a 9/16 inch wrench. With the bearing housing still on the workbench, bearing plate side down, install the pump suction casing onto the bearing housing in the desired orientation. Then install the 4 mounting bolts and tighten with a 5/8 inch wrench. Set the bearing housing onto the support and add the top piece. Install the 2 mounting bolts by hand. Place a level on top of the flange to ensure that the flange is level, then tighten the 2 mounting bolts with a 3/4 inch wrench. Bearing installation onto the pump drive shaft. While holding the pump drive shaft vertically with the keyway on top, place the thrust bearing onto the drive shaft, then the bearing spacer, followed by the radial bearing. The bearings and spacer are universal and can be mounted in either direction. While taking care to only put pressure on the inner race of the bearing to prevent damage, use an arbor press or hydraulic press and install the thrust bearing, spacer, and radial bearing onto the pump drive shaft all the way until it stops against the shoulder. Secure the pump drive shaft with installed bearings and spacer in a vise with keyway facing up. Install the lock washer and lock nut. Use an appropriately sized or adjustable hook spanner wrench to tighten down the bearing lock nut. After the bearing lock nut is tight, bend over the appropriate tab on the lock nut washer to prevent the lock nut from coming loose while the pump is in service. Shaft installation into the pump bearing housing. Set aside the packing gland insert, lantern ring, and collar pin retainer so they are ready to install onto the pump drive shaft. Hold the pump drive shaft by the keyway and start to insert the shaft into the end of the housing. Be careful not to damage the radial shaft seal. Slip the collar pin retainer, packing gland, lantern ring, and packing gland insert in the correct order onto the pump shaft as it emerges from the bearing housing so that it is on the shaft relator assembly. The beveled edge of the packing gland insert should face the suction casing. Push the insert into the stuffing box, followed by 2 to 3 pieces of packing. Alternate the cuts in the packing from side to side to prevent excessive leakage. Use the packing gland to push everything, including the lantern ring, into the stuffing box. Then add as many pieces of packing that will fit. Use a soft hammer or rubber mallet to tap the pump drive shaft all the way into the bearing housing. Packing gland and key installation. Install the 2 packing gland studs by screwing them onto the threaded holes on the sides of the suction casing. Tighten the packing gland nuts onto the 2 packing gland studs using a 9/16 inch wrench. Install the bearing cover onto the end of the bearing housing. Tighten down the 4 retaining bolts with a 9/16 inch wrench. Install the key into the keyway using a rubber mallet or hammer and dowel. Take care not to damage the pump drive shaft or key. Mounting the pump rotor onto the connecting rod. Put the rotor into a vise and hold it while you install the connecting rod. Install the 2 rubber connecting rod washers onto each end of the connecting rod. Insert the end of the connecting rod into the rotor head. Push the rotor pin into the hole in the rotor head and line up with the hole in the connecting rod. Gently tap with a hammer until the pin is all the way in and flush on both ends with the rotor head. Place the rotor pin retaining band on the head of the rotor. Using an arbor press or hydraulic press, press the rotor into the rotor pin retaining band until the pin is completely covered, ideally sitting the pin in the middle of the rotor pin retaining band and leaving space between the retaining band and the shoulder of the rotor head. Do not press the rotor pin retaining band all the way onto the rotor head until it hits the shoulder, as this will make the retaining band difficult to remove. Rotor stator installation. Measure the distance from the end of the suction casing to the center of the hole in the drive shaft. Put the conrod rotor assembly in a vise vertically with the rotor side up. Lubricate the inside of the stator and outside of the rotor with liquid soap. Using a strap wrench if necessary, screw the stator onto the rotor, leaving a 1/4 inch less from the edge of the stator to the center of the hole in the conrod than the previous measurement. Remove the rotor, stator, and conrod from the vise and insert it into the suction casing. Put pipe thread sealer onto the threads on the stator to be sure that the stator threads will not leak during pump usage. Thread the stator onto the suction casing until the hole in the conrod aligns with the hole in the drive shaft. Insert the drive pin and tap with a hammer and punch until the pin is flush with both sides of the drive shaft. Using a strap wrench or chain wrench, finish threading the stator into the suction casing until it is tight. Install the 2 connecting rod washers on both ends of the drive pin in the shaft. Slip the collar pin retainer over the drive shaft pin, making sure that the holes in the collar pin retainer are lined up with the connecting rod washers. Screw in the drive pin retaining screws and tighten down with a 5/16" Allen wrench. Be sure to tighten both sides evenly. Stator support installation and pump alignment. Add the bottom of the stator support to the stator. Put pipe thread sealant onto the threads of the other end of the stator to be sure that the stator threads will not leak during pump usage. Thread the pump discharge adapter onto the pump stator. Tighten with a strap wrench or chain wrench. Using a tape measure, make sure that the length from the center of the pump casing flange to the end of the pump adapter is the recommended distance for your specific stage LL4 pump. You can find all recommended lengths on your LL4 pump drawing or by going to our website at www.libertyprocess.com and downloading the appropriate manuals. Pro tip: cover the wrench damage with the stator support. Add the top of the stator support and tighten the 2 mounting bolts by hand. Using a tape measure, now make sure that the length from the end of the adapter to the anchor hole in the stator support is the recommended distance for your specific stage LL4 pump. Now tighten the 2 mounting bolts using a 9/16" wrench. Add the pump drain plug into the bottom of the pump casing. Use thread sealant to seal the threads to prevent leakage during use. Your pump is now completely assembled and should be leak tested using water to check the seal for leakage. If no leaks are present, the pump can now be reinstalled into the pump system. Feel free to celebrate accordingly. If you have any questions about or require spare parts for the repair of your Liberty Process LL4 progressive cavity pump, please feel free to contact us at www.libertyprocess.com. We always have complete pumps and all spare parts in our inventory ready to ship the same day.